start with just giving me a quick background on what's your total industry experience and the current organization where you're with, and especially around the tech stack where you're involved in, then we could take it forward from there.
Yeah, sure. So, hi Karthik, my name is Mansi Madirata, and I am basically having 5 years of experience into IT. So, if you talk about my experiences since the past 2 years, actually I've been working with Cisco client on the client location. I'm actually working on the payroll of Altran. So I have been working into networking domain basically since almost for 4.5 years it's been. So from if you talk about my technology stack, so currently since the past 2 years I've been working on to Cisco product that is Cast. As part of that, basically we are working into microservice based architecture where most of the services are actually there in Spring Boot itself. And if we talk about the database, so we are using MongoDB over there. Apart from this, for the inter-service communication part, we are using Kafka, and we also have certain REST APIs exposed in couple of services which actually are hit by the UI basically. That is there into React.js basically. And if you talk about the versioning tool, we are using Git, and for the build pipeline basically we are using Jenkins. For coverage and static analysis we are using SonarQube. Apart from this, we are also using Kibana dashboards for logging purpose. uh, and prior to this, actually, I was working with Wipro for a short tenure of time of about 6 months. That project was also there into Spring Boot. That was more of a healthcare domain product where you can actually, employees can actually register themselves for different healthcare plans and insurance benefits. Apart from this, prior to this also I was working with Cisco basically for an IVR system that we were actually working on, which was more helpful for customer care representatives. So where an admin had a portal where they can actually configure the user experiences based on their requirement, like whenever a caller calls and you get to hear certain instructions that press 1 for this, press 2 for this, then you have a periodic notifications running in at background. So those things were actually there. So yeah, as part of that also, that project was also there into Spring Boot itself. Yeah, that's it I think from my end.
Okay, cool. I think from a, I don't know, Sanjay and Sumit told you about the area that we're looking for. So before we start, I think we're looking for someone good in core Java and especially threading because the system is very asynchronous in nature, and a good hands-on experience on Spring. If possible, if there is an experience on Kafka and Cassandra, that would be an added advantage. But again, that's not something that we're looking for everyone to be familiarized. Yeah, but especially on core Java and Spring, and if there is an exposure on the microservices architecture, that would really help. And from a functionality standpoint, we have an payment engine that was built or couple of years back and it went live, but there is a re-architecture that's happening, and because it's microservices in nature, there are close to like 20, 30 plus services which come together to really process the transactions. So we're looking for technologists who can come and join a few.
Karthik, sorry to interrupt here. Actually, your voice is
Teams.
breaking a little bit.
Breaking, is it? Oh, sorry. Is it any better now or is it
Yeah,
still
yeah,
the same?
it's better now.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So I don't know how much you caught. To summarize, I think we're looking for someone good in core Java and hands-on on Spring, and especially good in multi-threading because of the asynchronous nature. And Kafka and Cassandra would be more of an added advantage. So before we proceed, I just want to know, you have any experience with Kafka or any other? Oh, you said Mongo, right?
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken. Okay. Okay. Any previous exposure with Cassandra at all? Or
Yes, actually, initially, I actually, in the very beginning, actually, I got a chance to work with Cassandra for an year or so. With Kafka, basically,
okay.
I've been working since the past almost 2 years.
Oh, okay. So you do have exposure on Kafka. Okay,
Yeah.
good, good, good. Cool. So we'll just start with the core Java, and then and then we'll see how it goes.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to start with, if you can tell me your understanding on singleton, right? So what do you mean by singleton, and how do we really create a singleton class in Java?
Yeah, so basically singleton is one of the design patterns, creational design patterns. So into singleton, basically we are actually restricting the object creation more than once. So we just have one single object of that particular class basically. So into singleton, basically the main thing is that we are restricting multiple object creation. If you talk about creating singleton classes basically, so inside that we should have like a private constructor basically, so that none other class is able to instantiate that particular class. Apart from that, basically we should have like for getting the instance of that particular class, we can have a get instance method which can be accessible from outside. So inside that basically we can put a check if that is null. If suppose that particular class instance is not yet created, we can return, we can actually create a new class instance and then return. Otherwise we can actually return the same instance. For making it thread safe, we can also use the synchronized block basically, along with the double check, so that it doesn't get broken in multi-threaded scenarios.
Thank you. And let's say you've written a singleton. How would you go about testing a singleton? Like either via JUnit or let's say any other mechanism that are comfortable with itself. I'm just keen on to knowing how can we confirm that it's just creating only one instance.
Okay, so I think we can do it using the JUnits. I think with singleton, if we talk about testing it, we can actually test using, we can actually call the get instance method basically into our, this JUnit. And out of get instance, okay, definitely we can actually test the negative scenario by, I think by using reflection we can actually be able to break it and create an instance of it, and then pass it to the JUnit for the negative scenario purpose. Positive one will definitely work by calling this get instance method.
So, so positive one you will call the get instance method, but what is the validation that you will do on your test case?
So, okay. So for the validation, I think we can. It will actually, for the positive one, we will call the get instance, and definitely that singleton. So the null check will actually, so it will be null. So it will actually create a new new object and actually return it to you. So we can check if the object that is returned is actually, we can check if assert in the assertive that that is actually not null. So we can do a assert not null over there. And we can also maybe check if the returned object is an instance of that singleton class basically.
Okay. You say that if I understand correctly, you say that you try to get the get instance, and after get instance, you would try to take the object and you just check whether it is not null or not. Okay. Is there any way to really verify that it's the same instance that's actually coming back again? The core of the singleton itself, right? Is there any way to really check that no matter how many times I call the get instance, uh, am I being written the same instance, or is my singleton creating new instance every time? The crux of the singleton, right? Is there a way to test that in JUnit?
Uh, so maybe we can call the get instance method multiple times, and basically I mean we can suppose in my JUnit I am calling that suppose three times. So first time it will actually create the instance, and rest of the two times it will actually return the same instance. So we can maybe check using equals that if all those three are same or not.
So you mentioned we'll use the equals to check whether all those are same or not, right? So just to confirm that you would be using the equals method on the object to check whether they are same or not, or you are looking for the equals comparator, the symbol, the double equal symbol. Which one would you use to really check?
Yeah, we can use the double equal to basically for that, because that object will be same, right? So the reference will also be the same, so we can check the double equal to.
Okay. And when does one go for equals versus double equal to?
Yeah, so
At what point one should look for equals method, and at what point one should use the double equals?
yeah, so basically, if we talk about equals method, so into that we can actually compare the content of two particular, objects, and double equal to along with the content that will also compare the references basically.
Yes. And I'm sure you would have used a lot of data structures within the collections framework, right?
Yeah.
So let's say I have a scenario where I am looking for a data structure which would guarantee uniqueness, but at the same time would also want to maintain the insertion order.
Okay.
So which is the data structure that you would prefer for?
I think for that uniqueness and insertion order, I think we can use okay, uniqueness and insertion order linked. We can use. I'm not sure. Maybe we can use linked hash set for that, because
Sure.
set
Any,
will.
any, any, any reason why you were not sure of it?
I, actually, I'm not properly able to recall. That is the only reason. But I think linked hash set will be the one, because it will maintain the insertion order, and set will have the property of having the unique and removing the duplicates basically.
Right, right. So I'm sure you used HashMap also a lot of time, right?
Yeah.
So in HashMap, let's say I have an employee HashMap where the key is an object called employee key, right? And within employee key, I have some integer or long as employee ID, right? Now this employee key will go as a key in my HashMap. Now in that employee key, for first scenario, I have overridden equals properly, but I have not overridden hash code,
Okay.
right? I just want your thoughts on two things. In this scenario where I have equals but I do not have hash code, if I start using this as key in my hash map, first point is will hash map behave properly? And second one is what would be the impact on the performance of the hash map, if any?
Yeah, so you mentioned that you have overridden the equals, but you have not overridden the hash code, right? So in this case, I think the hash map will actually not behave properly, because as soon as suppose you do a put or get operation on a hash map, it actually calculates the hash code, and based on that hash code, basically it does a mod by capacity. Initially the capacity is 16, right? So as soon as it does a mod by capacity, it gets to know, okay, into this bucket basically I have to insert this particular node. So going to that particular bucket, actually it inserts and then checks for, first it checks for equal, and then if none of the element is there which is equal to that, then it inserts that particular new node. So if suppose you haven't actually overridden the hash code method properly, so it will actually give you random hash codes. Like suppose if it is not properly overridden, so it might give you some other hash code, so it will actually insert to that particular bucket. So that will have definitely performance impact, because if you talk about the get operation in hash map, so it is actually done based on hash code calculation itself. Hash code is calculated, mod 16 is done, and then it gets from that particular bucket, so which is of O1 complexity. So if that is not properly inserted, then definitely there will be some impact in get, I think.
Okay. You said it does mod by capacity, right? Any reason why it does the mod by capacity?
Because okay, suppose I have a capacity of 16 for example. So ideally that node should be created within that particular capacity. If it is exceeding that, then it's not possible. Like it has a capacity of 16, so it will definitely fall from 0 to 15 only. So the reason doing mod of capacity is you will get some value between 0 to 15 itself. So that is why I think they do a mod by capacity, and yeah, definitely this might be the reason.
Got it, got it. And you said because we didn't override hash code, the hash code is going to give an random value, right? Do you know what's the default hash code that's returned by object class in case if the custom classes do not override the hash code?
Okay, so if default hash code, I think it is uh, it is calculated based on certain things by the JVM, maybe certain kind of memory addresses or something like that. So based on that, basically JVM internally has some algorithm based on which it basically calculates the hash code.
All right, thanks. So let's quickly spend 2 minutes on the other side of it, where a same scenario, I do not have equals overwritten, but I have overridden hash code and I have implemented proper hash code implementation to make sure that there is no hash collisions and all, right? So can you just lay down your thoughts on what's going to happen? Will hash map behave at least now? And would there be an impact on the performance of the hash map itself?
So you mentioned that equals is not overridden, right?
Yes, equals is not overridden, but hash code is overridden now.
Okay. Okay, so I think in that particular case, the bucket calculation logic will work properly. Like you have a hash code overridden, so it will all calculate the bucket properly by doing a mod of capacity. So based on that, I think bucket calculation will be proper. But if you do not have, like suppose properly you do not have equals method overridden, so what will happen is, suppose you have an employee object, okay, and it has certain, like for example it has a name and it has a id, and I haven't actually overridden that object. So it will actually use objects class equals method for comparing. So hash map has a property that if suppose two objects are same, two keys are same, it will actually override the previous one with the newer one. I mean it will replace basically. So if equals method is not properly overridden, it will actually call the equals of this object class. So if you override your equals properly, suppose for example my key is an employee object, and I, based on employee id, my constraint is employee id to be unique, so I override based on employee id. So if that is not done properly, then this object class equals method will be called, which actually compares for both reference as well as content. So definitely reference of if these two conditions satisfy, then it will consider that to be equal, and then in that case it will override. However, if this condition doesn't satisfy, then it will create a new node. So that completely depends on your requirement. Like suppose you are having a unique property, for just you are just considering employee ID to be the unique property. However, object class will actually consider both those objects completely, basically. Those two objects, the reference should be same, the all the values should be same. So things like that. So in that case, basically your equals will not work properly. And suppose uh, your requirement is, suppose tomorrow there is an employee, I want just the employee ID to be the unique constraint. But there is, suppose someone is coming so if two are equal, so it will override the previous one, basically. So it completely depends on your requirement, how you want it to work.
Okay. And how about the performance? Would it have an impact on the performance if I have hash code implemented but not equals?
Well, I don't.
Because you said that the bucket is okay
Yeah.
when you started off with it. So because the bucket is okay, would there be an impact on performance still?
I think there will not be any impact in the get latency, because definitely it is again going to calculate the bucket and get the data out of there. So that will be O1. So I don't think it will have any kind of impact on the latency. It will just be that the equals constraint, that you had to keep two objects as consider two objects as equal. That will work based on objects class implementation, but the get latency will, I think, be the same.
Okay. And so what's your understanding about an immutable class in Java?
Yeah, so immutable class is basically something that actually you cannot modify the value of that particular member variables of that particular class. So suppose I have like sorry, references of that particular class. So suppose I have in Java, basically string is an immutable class. So into string, basically, like we have suppose I have a string str is equal to, inside double quotes I have abc. So that is since string is immutable in nature, if you try to do s is equal to, suppose cde, then what will happen, it is not going to actually, the memory is allocated to abc and s is pointing to that. So basically that memory location is not going to update. It is going to allocate separate memory for that, and then the s reference will actually be changed to modify its reference to the newly allocated memory. So the previous one is actually not going to change, basically. So that is something immutable. So inside so in order to make a class basically immutable, so I think that should be declared as final, basically, so that none of the child class can actually extend it and change its behavior. Apart from this, basically the data members have to be private, so that none other class can be able to access those data members. And yeah, definitely, I think and there should be no setter, so that the member variables cannot be updated based on that.
Is there any scenario where you would go for an immutable class? What is general use case when someone will try to use an immutable class?
I think maybe in cases like where you actually don't want, you have a class and you don't want some other, you have something predefined basically into your code, and you do not want some other, some other class or some other entity actually update that particular block of code, or you can say that the properties of that particular object. So in that case, I think we are going to use immutability in that case.
Um, let's say I have a class with two methods. Okay. Uh, One method is a public static synchronized, and the other method is a public synchronized. Yeah. So I
Okay.
got thread one, which is already inside first method, and it's executing something there, right? At the same time, thread 2 is trying to get inside method 2 to execute something. Would thread 2 be able to go ahead and then execute the method 2, or will it have to wait for thread 1 to finish the method 1 execution? So one is a public static synchronized and the second one is a public synchronized.
Yeah, so I think thread 2 will have to wait till thread 1 actually releases a lock from the other method 1, because static synchronized basically puts a lock on class level. So until unless thread 1 completes its execution, thread 2 will not be able to actually execute method 2.
Okay. And thread 2 is expecting lock at what level for executing that method?
Yeah, so
The public synchronized one?
it is expecting basically lock on that particular object only, onto which method 2 will be operating.
Okay. So because you also said that thread 1 is having a lock at a class level, but thread 2 is taking a lock at an object level. So is there still a contention where thread 2 has?
Sorry, please come again.
No, you said that for the method 1, the lock is taken at a class level, right?
Yes.
And for the method 2, the thread 2 is looking for a lock at an object level,
Yes.
right? So the object and class are both of them two different things, or is it the same thing?
So basically, class actually you can say is an class is basically you can say a wrapper that actually consists of that actually has the objects along with member variables into it. Whereas an object is simply, you can say, that is an entity or part of a class, that is instance of a class basically.
Okay. Do you have any exposure to executors, frameworks in concurrency package?
Well, honestly speaking, I actually haven't worked on executor framework basically. I just have a very, you can say, very basic idea about it.
Okay. Yes. So have you heard about thread pools, thread pool executors,
Yes, yes.
fixed thread pools executors?
Yeah.
Okay. Have you used any of them, like few, and have you written any code using Future or something like that so far?
Actually, I just know that there is an executor service basically, into which you can basically create, single there is single thread pool executor, and fixed thread pool there is there. So these kind of, I think, 3 to 4 kinds of it are there, and then you can use the execute method to actually execute a particular to actually execute particular tasks onto which those threads actually perform. So thread pool is basically something, it's a group of basically threads which actually which actually consist of a number of threads that basically execute certain tasks, and once those tasks are done, they get to execute new set of tasks basically.
Okay. Yes. And you have exposure to Spring,
Yes.
correct? Hmm. So what's your understanding about dependency injection in Spring?
Yeah, so basically, if you talk about dependency injection is in Spring, I would just like to explain that with a simple example. So dependency injection is something that you are actually, providing a dependency of some, you can say, some bean into some other bean. So for example, suppose I have a REST controller, right? So inside the REST controller, I am actually writing the logic. I'm actually calling the service layer for this business logic execution. So I actually, using the @AutoWired annotation, I actually provide the service dependency to that controller basically. Until unless you provide that service dependency, you will not be able to actually, if you are using @AutoWired service over there, you have to provide the dependency of that service. Basically, the bean of that service has to be injected inside the bean of controller. So this is where dependency injection is there. So this is majorly used for loose coupling, right? So suppose I have a controller and I have a service. Into that service has, suppose based on the requirement, it has multiple implementations. So it will provide a loose coupling that based on your requirement, you can inject any implementation of that particular service into your controller, so that you can actually call that particular implementation basically.
Right. So you mentioned about auto wired, right?
Yeah.
So when you do auto wired, how does Beam know? So how does Spring know which beam to inject for the auto wire?
Yeah, so actually, Spring basically does it in two ways. First, it does a auto wire by type. So if you have, suppose, auto wire at the rate service, and that service has only just one implementation or something like that, so it will auto wire by type and automatically inject that particular dependency over there. And the other one is auto wire by name. So suppose you provide you have, suppose, device service IMPL. So if you provide it as device service IMPL, it will auto wire by name. If so, it happens in cases like I have, suppose, two implementations of a particular interface that I am auto wiring over there, and I want to inject one particular implementation into it, because type will not work, because it will have two similar types, right? Two particular implementation will have the same type. So you can use at the rate qualifier and uh, provide the bean name over there, so that will automatically auto wire by name over there.
Okay, okay, okay. And so do you know anything about at primary annotation in Spring? Have you used it?
Yeah, I think we actually use it in for the configuration purpose, when suppose we have to actually configure two different data sources. In those cases, basically we use at primary in basically. So it if you provide at the rate primary, so the bean of that particular wherever you are, suppose you are providing it on method level, so the bean will actually be created initially only, I mean, at the very beginning basically.
Okay. Um, have you, I don't know whether you got a chance, right? So, have you looked at any memory management within Java to say, do you know how Java manages memory internally of the running application?
Honestly speaking, I actually never got a chance to work on that particular part.
Okay, okay. And I'm sure you should have dealt with exceptions in Java, right?
Yeah.
What is the topmost hierarchy when it comes to the exception hierarchy? The class which is sitting at the top.
Yeah, so we have exception class basically at the top, and then we have we also have runtime exception for runtime based exceptions basically.
Okay. How about errors? Do you know where errors come into picture in the hierarchy?
Okay, error is basically error is I think parallel to exception. I'm not very sure about it, but yeah, maybe it is parallel to exception itself.
Okay. And you said you have, I don't know, maybe, I don't know if I recall. So, you said you had exposure to Kafka,
Yes.
right? And how, I mean, what is the level in which you got exposed to Kafka? I mean, you were just writing some consumers and publishers, or you were involved in creating topics with the right partitions and looking at how Kafka consumes it and all.
Yeah, so basically, I mean, I have been involved into writing the consumers and producers, and also like we usually for creating partitions and replication, providing the replication factor. I am actually not exactly able to recall what are the key value pairs that have to be provided. So we actually provide it into Docker Compose basically. So actually we have like a Docker container running, inside which we have Kafka running. So I think Kafka's server.properties file actually has this default partition and replication factor, which you can actually override. Either you can it's not a good approach to change it into server.properties itself. So we actually provide an environment variable from Docker itself, listing the number of partitions and the replication factor along with it.
Okay. Okay. So, uh, so if I have five partitions for a given topic in Kafka, and if I have, let's say, 20 consumers trying to consume message from that particular topic, right? Do you know how many consumers will consume the message parallelly at a given point in time? Will all 20 consumers get one message from one partition and then try consuming it parallelly? So you got one topic, five partitions, but we have 20 consumers,
Okay.
right?
So
And
I
let's say you have 100 messages on the topic now, right? So will at any given point in time, will I have all 20 consumers taking message from Kafka topic and trying to process it at the same time?
Uh, I think basically, if you have like it depends on the consumer ID. I think if you have like suppose you have five consumers, right? And if you have like the same consumer ID for all of those five, so basically one consumer will be able to actually read from that particular thing. If you have different consumer IDs for all those five, so five consumers at a time will be actually sorry, 20 consumers. If you have different consumer IDs, then I think they will be able to read at that particular time. Only five consumers will be able to read at a particular time.
So why is it that only five consumers will be able to read at a particular time?
Uh,
What happens to the remaining 15?
it's because you have like five partitions, so definitely multiple consumers will be actually reading from one particular partition, right?
Okay. So in this case, like where I have 20 consumers and five partitions, as per your understanding, will we have one consumer reading from only one partition, or we are saying two consumers will be reading from same partition?
I think we can have multiple consumers reading basically from the partitions, right?
Okay. Okay. Uh, have you ever seen a deadlock anytime in JVM?
Honestly speaking, in basically the current in my current project, I have never seen a deadlock situation. Maybe we are doing a very good code basically, but yeah, I actually haven't seen any kind of deadlock as such.
Okay, okay. So in case if a deadlock occurs, are you aware what has to be done in order to really see what is going on so that we can at least try to see where the deadlock is and then we can try to resolve it?
Yeah. So basically, in case of deadlock, basically, like suppose one particular thread has a certain resource which is required by another thread, and that basically I think we can find it out using the logs basically, if that deadlock is there. So I think we can I think through the logs we can find it. And in order to basically avoid deadlock situations, we could better so this will definitely happen in a multi-threaded environment. So we can actually manage our resources in a better way, and basically lock only those things which are actually required by lock only those resources which always lock a resources which is actually required. Do not lock rest of the resources. Like for example, I'm not giving you an example based on this particular thing. Like suppose I have a database, right? So while performing, suppose while saving certain data or updating data to the database, there can be inconsistency problems, right? In case multiple threads are trying to at the same time save or update certain data into the database. So in that case, basically locking the, so we have couple of approaches to locking basically the database. For example, we have pessimistic approach and we have optimistic approach. So inside pessimistic, the entire database is locked, right? So that will not solve any purpose. That will actually degrade the performance of your application if you're locking the entire database just because one thread is basically trying to modify one particular table of yours, and that to a particular row of that table. So in that case, we go for example, we go for optimistic locking, where the lock is actually done on row level, so that it actually improves your performance, as well as it ensures that there is no consistency issues basically. So we should just lock those things only which are actually meant to be locked, meant to be updated. We should not lock the entire thing ideally.
Okay. 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 Um, I think that's pretty much that I had, Mansi, for today. I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Yeah, I would just like to ask, what